Okay, it's a little bit after 8 p.m. on Tuesday evening, and I've just finished watching the Senate pass their committee substitute on House Bill 4. It was passed without any changes from what the committee substitute was that was approved on Sunday. So if you go and take a look at it, you will see that everything that we warned about is now going over to the House for conference committee. And Senator Betancourt, at least, claims that Chairman Buckley prefers the Senate version to the House version. I find that hard to believe because they're completely different bills. But here's where the danger lies. The danger lies in that the slogan, "We're getting rid of STAAR," is a political, firework that they all want to cling to so much that it doesn't matter that if we pass the Senate bill, it really isn't true. So let's back up and talk about House Bill 4 and what was intended to do and what the Senate bill did to that intent. So House Bill 4 was intended by the House to reform the state assessment system by replacing the STAAR assessment, which by law is a criterion reference assessment, which means we evaluate students against a set of standards, and in this case it was the Texas TEAC standards, and that's how we're ranking them. And the intent was to stop that and replace this one criterion reference test with a series of shorter, what are called 3-year assessments, a beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of year assessments. Those would then be norm reference, which is national norm reference, means it's comparing students to other students as opposed to arbitrary standards. Because when you're comparing to arbitrary standards, you can manipulate your results however you want. You just set your cut level wherever you want it to be, and boom, you either made it or you didn't. Which, by the way, we saw the TA adjust every single year what their standards and score levels were. When you're comparing students to other students, you can't play that game because there's just a curve, and you fall somewhere on that distribution. So the House bill had some problems. Let's be clear. It was not a perfect bill. It might have sort of improved the situation. It wouldn't have gotten rid of high stakes. It didn't try to get rid of high stakes. But whatever problems the House bill had, you could at least make an argument that it was better than STAAR, that it was an improvement on STAAR. The Senate bill is 10 times worse than the House bill ever was. And it not only is not a replacement of STAAR in anything but name, it's actually an adoption, a reincorporation of STAAR, and a recommitment to it. Look, this is what Senator Betancourt said on the floor of the House. We're going to take the best of the STAAR criterion test and move it forward. So he is embracing the way that STAAR works and saying that what we're going to do with this new bill, this Senate substitute for House Bill 4, is we're going to take all the best things of STAAR and we're going to double down and move it forward. So let me tell you, my conclusion, and I said this the other night, I feel so strongly about how bad these changes from the Senate are that I think we're actually better off with 2 more years of STAAR than passing a very bad House Bill 4 with the Senate changes. So let me tell you why. First, House Bill 4, the way it passed the House, promised to replace STAAR, which is a Texas-created test over Texas standards, to replace that with a nationally norm-referenced assessment. If you have a norm-reference assessment, you can then compare Texas students to other students on a level field. You can't do that when you're just testing your own kids against your own standards. The Senate took that out, which, by the way, means we can't compare voucher students because they are going to be taking nationally norm reference assessments. So that bit of accountability on the voucher system, gone. Senator Betancourt actually referred to a normed assessment, but that is not what the bill does. And I hope people aren't fooled by this. And let me tell you how to know that this is right, okay? Texas Education Code 39.023, at the very beginning, requires a criterion referenced Texas assessment. The House bill that passed repealed that. and replace that with a nationally normed assessment. The Senate version took that out. So that part of the education code that calls for a state level criterion reference assessment, which is exactly what STAAR is, that remains unchanged. The Senate did not change that. And so what we're left with is this new assessment, whatever we call it, is still going to be exactly what STAAR is. A Texas-created test over Texas standards, comparing students to arbitrarily scaled standards and not to one another. That's what STAAR does, and that's what the Senate bill is going to do, because as Senator Betancourt says, we're taking the best of STAAR and we're moving it forward. Second thing, House Bill 4 promised shorter assessments. They even wrote maximum time limits into the bill. And for way of comparison, since we only know the end of the year assessment here, under House Bill 4 as it came out of the House, the end of year assessment, the big one, had to be designed so 85% of the students could finish in 90 minutes or less. Now you compare that to STAAR, where 3 hours, 4 hours is normal. 90 minutes or less coming out of the House version, okay? And the beginning and middle of the year assessments were even shorter, I think like 60 minutes. The Senate took all the time limits out. That is nowhere to be found in the Senate bill. And all it says is, well, they should be shorter if it's practicable. What does that mean? That means if you can create a valid assessment in a shorter amount, then you should try and do that. What does that translate to? That would translate to the fact that the TEA, who gets to make the new test, can just say it has to be this long to be valid and keep it exactly the same length as our current STAAR assessment, which, by the way, was exactly the excuse the TEA gave for why STAAR was so long. And every time the legislator wanted to shorten it, they pushed back against it, saying it has to be this long to be valid. So we've got no change there either. The TEA becomes the arbiter of the length. And we don't even have what we have in the law now, which are guides for how long it should be. Okay. Third problem with the Senate substitute on House Bill 4. House Bill 4 that came out of the House, for whatever problems it had, did one really excellent thing that we've all been pushing for years and years. And that is this. It said the only state assessments we're going to give are those that are required by federal law. We're not going to have any Texas special, we love to test, assessments. So, some of the extra social studies assessments in elementary school, the U.S. History EOC exit level, the English 2 EOC exit level, all of those would have gone away under the House version. We've been left with 3 exit level assessments in high school. We would have been left with no social studies assessments in elementary or middle school. Guess what the Senate did? Left it all in. Not a single assessment goes away if the Senate version is adopted at the conference committee. So one of the really tangible and actual improvements that House Bill 4 made coming out of the House has been gutted by the Senate. It's gone, okay? And finally, and there's more than this, and people that particularly are concerned about challenges to the accountability system can talk about this in more detail. But finally, the House version, HB 4, had tried to expand accountability ratings away from just looking at numbers derived from test scores. I mean, we were at a point where at the younger ages, almost every single bit of the assessment of the school's accountability rating was derived from test scores. A little better in high school, but it was still the overwhelming factor. And so they wanted to put in new factors, expand local accountability plans, look at things that actually deal with human factors. Maybe you look at extracurricular participation or other measures that clearly do relate to the quality of a school. And there are lots of extracurricular offerings and students are participating. That is a fulfilling education. That is something that should be included when we're talking about what the quality of a school is. The Senate version takes all of that out in favor of test score, test score, test score. In other words, the Senate version is just the same system we have now. And by the way, go back and watch the Senate debate. Those senators love STAAR. They love the accountability system, and they want it to stay the same or get even more rigorous. That's their word. Just in other words, test more. But okay, I haven't even gotten to the craziest part. Okay, so the big promise of House Bill 4, we're getting rid of STAAR, we're replacing it with these 3 assessments 2 short ones beginning of the year, middle of the year, and a little bit longer one, at the end of the year. Of course, that's not true under the Senate version. But here's what else isn't true under the Senate version. That you're going to have a beginning of the year and a middle of year assessment. Now you might, those are going to be developed, we're going to pay the money for them. But in the Senate version of the bill, those beginning of the year and middle of the year progress-oriented assessments, those are optional. But it says it, optional. Which means the only assessment that is required, and therefore the only assessment that can count for purposes of accountability, is the end of the year assessment, just like the STAAR. And so if you have at the end of the year the one big test that everything is going to be focused on for accountability purposes, all the craziness that surrounds the STAAR right now is going to remain just with a new name. The real danger, all that stuff is real. It's going to happen if the House doesn't stand up. The real danger is that if the Senate version passes, it turns into this gigantic wolf in sheep's clothing. The House, the Senate together are going to high-five each other and pretend that they've reformed this system that everyone has hated for the last, 13 years, when all they've really done is lock it in for another 10 with a new name. We'll have another 10 to 15 more years of the same crazy system, no hope of paring it back, because they're going to be patting themselves on the back for the next 4 years. And so here's what I'm asking. We got to make phone calls, okay? We've got to make phone calls. We've got to call Brad Buckley, the chairman of the House Public Education Committee. He's the author of the bill. We've got to call Diego Bernal, the co-author of the bill. And we need to tell them, look, do not consent to the Senate changes. Tell them that we want the House version back. We want the nationally normed assessments. We want time limits in the bill. We want to toss out all assessments that are not federally mandated. And we want an accountability system that looks at other factors as much as it does the test scores. And we need to be prepared to tell them that if the Senate holds to these changes, we don't want the bill, period. We don't want the bill, period. Because districts are already voluntarily doing through-year testing with maps and pilot programs and things like that. We don't want the Senate's version of this bill because all it does is take the worst of STAAR and move it forward. They call it the best of STAAR. Let's be real. What they want to move forward is everything that's bad about STAAR. So we've got to make the phone calls. Again, Brad Buckley, Diego Bernal on the Education Committee. Give their offices a call. If any of the other Public Education Committee members in the House happen to be your representative, get on the phone and call them. They need to hear from you that we do not agree. Texas parents are not going to be Texas parents are not going to be fooled if you just take STAAR, rename it, and ram it down our throats for another 10 years. Don't care what they call it. We're going to be here to fight it, and we got to turn out at the voting booth. So let's get on the phone tomorrow. Let's get on the phone Thursday to Representative Buckley, Representative Bernal, and tell them don't consent to the Senate changes. Put the House version back in. And if the Senate won't do that, then let's fight the next session. Let's not put a bad bill through for the sake of saying we did something, because all we will do is lock us in to 10 more years of STAAR, just with a different name. All right? You guys have a good night, but that's what we're dealing with.